Hi, this is Pastor Tim. Welcome to week 7, chapter 6 of Braving Babylon as we travel through the book of Daniel. This is a study guide, and I hope that you're enjoying these times as you can go a little deeper. I only have 45 minutes to try to preach on these things. I've gone too long, but there's so much in here that is just so exciting. I pray that you're going deeper, and maybe these study questions help you. Let's jump right in. You're welcome to pause after each question and have a time of discussion. And as always, if you have questions and you'd like to talk to me about that, I would love to help you out however I can. Here we go. Question number 1. How did Daniel spend the end of his life? And what were the markers of his character in his old age? Daniel spent his old age different than the way most of us do. He did not just fade. He stayed strong. He continued to work. And by the time he was in his late 80s, he was one of the most powerful men in the world. And so this is an incredible testimony to his faithfulness, serving God no matter where it was. He'd spent his life in a foreign country. He was a stranger and an alien, so to speak. By the way, we are all sojourners here. We are all traveling through. We're strangers and aliens. And Daniel is a great example of what it's like to live in that culture. He did not hate them. He loved them. At the same time, he did not conform to the Babylonian worldview or here, the Persian worldview. And so we see here that he finished well. He worked hard. He didn't just fade off in the sunset. And then as we look at his qualities, he was a man of tremendous integrity. He was a man who went to the Lord in prayer often, so he must have had a deep relationship with God. He was a man who was fearless in his walk with God, and he did not fear going into the lion's den, so he was a man of great faith. He was a man who did good things for his employer, so to speak. He was very good at his job, and King Darius loved the fact that Daniel was so good at his job that he promoted him. And so we see a man that is an incredible example for all of us. Do not fade. Stay strong until God calls you home. Remember, the safest place to be as a Christian is serving God. We have a guaranteed eternal life until his job for us is finished, and then he will call us home. Let's go on to question number 2. What qualities of human nature does Satan exploit in order to oppress God's people? We saw this in this passage. Take a little time to discuss that. Here in this chapter 6, we see selfishness, we see jealousness, we see envy, we see ambitions, all tied up and bound up in the hearts of Babylonian people. They're tied up in the hearts of all people. We are all lost, and these things are markers in all of our lives. And Satan used them to try to destroy Daniel. You know, Satan will use people to try to destroy you and your witness. And they might not even know they're doing it. But we have to be careful to be on guard and know that Satan has his ways. He's wily, and sometimes he will work through other people. We have to remember always that our warfare is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, rulers in these dark places. In other words, we're having a spiritual warfare, not a physical warfare. Daniel didn't lash out at these men. He simply obeyed God, and God took care of the rest. Let's look at question number 3. Why should no decree of men ever be irrevocable? Here we see that the king decreed that anybody who did not kneel down and worship or cease worshiping others, worshiping other gods or other statues, would be thrown in the lion's den. That was a foolish decree. And yet, in that culture, they said the king is always right. The king can never be wrong. Therefore, the king can never go back and change his decrees. And that is a prerogative only given to God. God is the only one who's perfect. There is no human perfect, including kings, and sometimes especially kings. And so we need to learn a lesson from here. We need to learn how to admit when we're wrong, and we need to acknowledge it, and we need to apologize for it, and we need to change. And that is something that's something Darius wished he could have done, but the silly law that they had put in place would not allow him to do that. Let's move on. Number 4. Do you really believe God will deliver you from persecution, trials, and troubles the way he delivered Daniel? In all seriousness, do you have real faith in God that as the boys who went into the pit of fire, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they said, God can deliver us, but even if he doesn't, we're going to trust him. And that's exactly what Daniel did. He did not have any kind of assurance that he would be delivered, but he knew God could. And so that is how we are to live our lives. In faith that God's plan for us is a good plan, that his plan for us is the best plan, and that we are simply going to trust him to carry it out. Number 5, discuss the irony of Babylon and Babylon's king proclaiming the glory of God to the nations, whereas Israel had failed to do so. And do you see any contemporary parallels? Here it's amazing that we had seen Nebuchadnezzar proclaim through all the world how great and awesome God is. And then we see Darius doing the same thing, sending out a proclamation that nobody would dishonor this God of the Hebrews. It's strange that God is using the Babylonians, the Medes, and the Persians to make this proclamation, to exalt him, to glorify him, when God's people had failed to do so. Listen, there are modern parallels to this. You and I should be giving him praise in public places. We should be pronouncing in our families, in our workplace, in our sports teams, in our schools. Around the world, we should be glorifying God. That is not something for the rocks and stones to do. And so we need to lift him up and not be shy about it. That leads us to last question number 6. How is Daniel an example for you and for me? This closes out the narrative part of Daniel. The next 6 chapters are going to be prophecies that Daniel received. But Daniel and his friends have served as an incredible example for you and me on how to live in a Babylonian culture, which we do. And so we see their faithfulness. We see their fear of God, not their fear of man. We see how they loved the people that were around them, even though they refused to be absorbed by them. We see how they honored their king, and yet they did not do it to the place that they dishonored their God. We see these were men of prayer, men who partnered with one another, and certainly men who stood strong, knowing that it was more important to follow God than follow the things of this world. I pray that you've learned a ton from Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. And if not, go back through and read it again. That is incredibly valuable for us. I hope that you've enjoyed today's study guide. God bless.